Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Russians are invading the Ukraine. I think a history lesson is in order. Take you back to 1938. Adolf Hitler annexes a neighbor, Austria. Just took them over. The West, the world, the freedom-loving people watched. He got away with that. And he took them over because he wanted to, in his way, statement, unify the German-speaking peoples. Not long after that, that was in March of 1938, then in October of 1938, Adolf Hitler just decided that he wanted part of Czechoslovakia, the Sudetenland, saying the same thing, that German-speaking people were being persecuted and that he wanted to help them, and he annexed the Sudetenland. The West really agreed to that. We've heard about the appeasement of Chamberlain, agreed to it, waved his paper, peace in our time. Not long after that, Hitler decided he wanted more of Czechoslovakia. Then he invaded Poland, and then World War II started. And he invaded other countries. That was in the beginning of 1938. Now I'll take you to today. Vladimir Putin, Russia, he invaded the Republic of Georgia. And he did so in August of 2008. And he took 1/3 of the country. I happened to be in the Republic of Georgia shortly after the Russians invaded. I saw the Russian tanks on the horizon. And remember, Mr. Speaker, Putin invaded invaded Georgia, took 1/3 of the land, and the Russians are still there. The world just moved on. The Georgians are trying to figure out some way to deal with Putin's imperialistic attitude. But the Russians were there, are there, no consequences for that action. And now we bring us to March of 2014. Of course, Georgia, as we all know, was a former Soviet republic. And now Putin has his eyes on another former Soviet republic, the Ukraine. And the Russian military, even though they went in with uniforms, just decided to move in and take over part of Ukraine, Crimea. That is the latest activity. Similar to what Adolf Hitler did back in the 30s and the 40s. And so, yes, Putin is similar to Adolf Hitler in that he has this appetite for other people's land. And he tries to justify it some way, and he just waits to see if anybody is going to do anything about it. This is a photograph taken by the Associated Press, Mr. Speaker, and it's some Ukrainian women that are holding up signs. Here's a photograph of Adolf Hitler over here on the far right, and they're holding a sign. This is a Russian flag with a swastika in the middle. Here's another poster being held up showing the Russian flag, comparing Putin to Hitler and the Nazis quest and their appetite to take other people's sovereign land. I think the analogy is in order. And I think the world should understand that Putin has it somewhere in his brain that he can just, on his own, justify the taking of other people's sovereign land. And I think it's important that we recognize the obvious. And what we will do about it, we shall see. When the Russians moved into Georgia, I personally don't think much happened. The world, other than the Georgians, didn't complain too much. So the Russians understood that they could do it and get away with it. Putin did. 6 years later, deja vu, it's all over again. And he believes that he can get away with the invading of sovereign nations because of the reason these nations, to some extent, depend on Russia for their energy, including and specifically natural gas. And the Kremlin is working to reestablish its empire by bullying countries like the Ukraine, its neighbor, who broke away from the Soviet Union years ago, but never was quite able to get away from the influence and intimidation of Putin. Russia's used its advantage, its competitive advantage, to maintain a stronghold over Eastern Europe and the European states that were formerly aligned to the Soviet Union. This is my opinion, that Russia, Putin, has its goal to try to bring in those former Soviet republics under the sphere of influence of Russia, under some new name. That is my opinion. It looks like that they are already started this. 70% of the gas that goes to the Ukraine comes from Russia. 6 nations in the European Union rely on Russia for 100% of their natural gas. And much of Europe relies on the Kremlin for natural gas, although they don't get all 100% of their gas. So you've got Europe, former Soviet republics, the Ukraine, depending on energy, natural gas, from Russia. The Russians know that. And reliance on the Russian gas shapes really the foreign policy of Eastern European countries, the Western European countries, and especially the former Soviet republics. And it jeopardizes, I think, political and economic reforms. Russia understands this, of course. They understand the stranglehold, the monopoly, the bullying they can get away with because they are the source of the natural gas. And 2 times in the last 10 years, for political reasons, they've been punished economically, that is the Ukrainians, by the Russians turning off the gas. Now, I happened to be in the Ukraine when the Russians turned off the gas one winter. Mr. Speaker, it gets cold in the Ukraine without heat. And the Russians did that to make sure that the Ukrainians, I believe, come around and support Russian politics. This past weekend, even the Russians warned that the Ukrainians were not going to be able to continue to get some kind of discounted rate unless they reinstated the former Ukrainian president. So, you know, they are blackmailing the Ukrainians because the Ukrainians want a different president other than the one the Russians support. So we can change that. You know, the people back home in Texas, I think they're like most Americans. They don't think it's legal, right, for the Russians to invade another country and just start moving in and taking over. But they asked this question, what are we going to do about it? Remember, back when Hitler was in charge, it took a while for the West to react, and finally had to react militarily. Maybe we should try to react sooner and not have to react militarily. And why don't we do that economically? And the way to do that is, I believe, to give the Ukrainians, the former Soviet republics, and Eastern and Western Europe as well, an alternative for the hostage that they are being held by the Putin because of their energy issues and the lack of natural gas, the lack of having an alternative. And where should they look? They should look to the United States, and the United States should look to helping out these countries, but also it would help us economically. And we should be ready to and eager to export our abundant natural gas to our European friends. I think very few people in the energy industry would have believed 5 years ago that the United States would have so much natural gas that we would be able to export it, that we can produce it in such an efficient and clean way that we can export it to foreign countries. And this is an opportunity to do so, and we should do so. There's an ice cream company down in Texas which makes the best ice cream in the world. It's called the Blue Veil Ice Cream Factory in Brenham, Texas. And their slogan is, we eat all we can and we sell the rest. That should be our slogan with natural gas. We use all we can in the United States and we sell the rest. And who should we sell it to? We could start with these Eastern European nations.